Hi, and welcome to our special live stream tonight, where we have we have a very special guest with us, and we are going to be delving into a topic that often does not get enough airtime, especially not with the depth that we're going to hear about it tonight. And the topic we're discussing is sex. And a beautiful friend and graduate of the School of Soul Level Astrology, Ann Vajradakini, will be joining Soul Level Astrologer Mark Borax for a night of talking about sacred sexuality and the modern age. So we're really excited to have all of you joining us tonight. And I would just like to add that we're still kind of on fire after the launch of Mark's new book, The Ruby Heart of the Dragon, Sun Signs for Our Times. And this particular, thank you, beautiful, we have a visual here. And this particular topic is really important for us to feature, in part because the book has already got not to number 1, but to number 2 under the category of sacred sexuality. And part of the reason for that is that Mark weaves his own experiences and just a deep, well, I don't want to just say deep appreciation for sex, but a deep love for how sexuality can create great change and transformation in people. So it is actually woven throughout the book. And again, it'll just be great to really go deep on this topic with someone like Ann, who I'll tell you a bit about here now, who has a lot of experience working privately with clients and also has earned herself, through her devotion and commitment, a certificate in advanced Tantra. So she's an advanced tantric educator, and she has a sacred sexuality practice in Longmont, Colorado. So the other things I just want to say about Ann before I turn it over to her and Mark to kick off the conversation is that we love Ann. And she graduated from our Soul Level Astrology certification program several years ago. And she earned the title of Temple Dog, which for many of you may mean nothing, but for us means someone who handles herself and spaces with great care and tends to community in a super generous and heartfelt way. She's also been a huge inspiration to our other students and people in our school because of her liberated view on sexuality and the power that she brings through her body because of her devotion to clearing her body and the channels of the whole system, I'll say, in order to live a more pleasurable and blissful life. So the final thing that I just want to say is that she's a hell of a lot of fun. So this is going to be a great night. And she just brings a high level of awareness and consciousness to all that she does, especially her work and her life arts. So it's really a great honor for me to welcome Ann Vajradakini to help lead this night and really bring us into a deep conversation.
Thank you, Marcella. Thank you so much. I am truly happy to be here. 2 of my favorite topics, sexuality and especially sacred sexuality and astrology together, that's about as good as it gets in my universe. And it's my honor and my privilege and my great joy to enter into this space and have this conversation with you, Mark. And I just want to introduce Mark a little bit. We're here tonight because Mark has just self-published his 3rd book, which is called The Ruby Heart of the Dragon, Sun Signs for Our Times, which I believe will revolutionize, or even more aptly said, it will evolutionize our views of the 12 signs. And I wouldn't be a tantric educator were it not for Mark. It was actually in a couple of my very first readings that he recommended that I study Tantra. And I thought, really? Why would I do that? I was raised by an ex-Trappist monk. My father's novice master was Thomas Merton. So I never imagined that I would be living a life that involved sexuality outside of that very Catholic box. So Mark has written 2 other books, one of them a bestseller called 2012, The Bridge to the Future. And in 1986, Mark met one of his literary idols. Would that be a fair thing to say about Ray Bradbury to you, Mark? Yeah.
Yeah, my main childhood idol.
Ray Bradbury, who he spent personal time with, and Ray encouraged him to write. And Mark spent many years writing. And while Mark is the main professor at the College of Visionaries and Wizards, and his Marcella is his co-pilot in the college, he also is a very accomplished singer-songwriter and an author and a poet and a wordsmith of massive proportion. And so this is Mark's third book, in the middle between bridging the bridge to the future. He also wrote a book called Cosmic Weather Report. And I'm looking forward to Mark sharing some with us about this book. This version of astrology is unique in that Mark called it soul level astrology, calls it soul level astrology because we put the soul before the astrology. And this is not an astrology of being out in the stars. It's an astrology of tapping into the live, very current energy that's in the stars and bringing that down to earth. And so, of course, there's an inevitable reckoning with sexuality, because if we're going to land all the way into our bodies, down into our root chakras, sexuality is an aspect of that. And he's going to share with us some words from that tonight. And I have the deepest gratitude for all of the ways that Mark has taught me for many years. I began to study with him 10 years ago, and the college began in 1987, Mark? Is that?
No, the college began in 2008.
2008.
Yeah.
And so I just, without further ado, and I've always wanted to say this, we often call Mark Captain in class, very fondly, as a nod also to Captain Kirk. Captain, oh my Captain. What do you want to share with us tonight about astrology and sacred sexuality?
Thank you, Anne, and thank you, Marcella. I appreciate the introductions. And I want to read from the Virgo chapter of my new book, where I read you all the sun signs, because I don't think astrologers have ever gotten Virgo. I think out of all the 12 signs, Virgo has been the least accurately portrayed until now. And I want to read from that chapter, which goes into sexuality as a way to provide a touchstone for discussion. Like Penelope turning away suitors in the Odyssey while her husband's lost at sea, many Virgos spend their lives waiting for the invitation they can't refuse. More than any other member of the zodiac, this one craves the full release that only right livelihood can supply. Until that invitation comes along, Virgo may get a myriad of things done but feel unsatisfied, knowing she hasn't done what she came for. Whether Virgo turns the waiting period into reverent vigil or quarrel with existence makes all the difference. This sign's operating instructions could be, whatever you can't analyze, you may as well dance with. And whatever you can analyze, you may as well dance with even more. Throughout the dance, she's searching for something to serve that serves her as well. Most Virgos for a long time are much better at telling you what that isn't than what it is. Searching for sacred invite, the sign built to serve must spend countless hours learning what not to serve. In our age, service is often looked down upon. But in some cultures and at earlier times, it was a sacred art. And those trained to practice it, like the Vestal virgins of ancient Rome, were held in high esteem. Virgo means virgin. And historic appropriation of that word has prevented the true nature of the sign from being recognized by astrologers, who often stereotype it as the prissy librarian or anal retentive old maid who crosses her T's and dots her I's while getting all her ducks in a row. Prior to Christianity, though, the word had a much different meaning. Rather than a girl who hadn't had intercourse, virgin meant a woman unto herself. In ancient times, temple dancers were called virgins, fulfilling a function that in today's parlance has been called sacred prostitute. If that seems an oxymoron, consider how Christian dogma split the divine and carnal sides of the feminine into the two Marys, the Immaculate Mary, Mother of God, who gave birth without being penetrated, and the profane Mary, who never stopped being penetrated, Mary Magdalene, who ran around with the other Mary's son. According to this dogma, if you're born in a female body, you're a slut or a saint. If the notion of sexuality uniting you with God seems blasphemous, it may be because the split persists. In some matriarchal cultures, it was believed that man couldn't get to the goddess without going through the priestess who was her divine avatar. He couldn't access the life-giving succor of the divine feminine without making love to its representative on earth. Man needed the grace of the goddess to bless his journey and watch over his long nights. Certain women were trained to erotically dance in temple courtyards, enticing worshippers to make love with them. The priestess's body was understood to be a living temple within the larger temple to seduce men into the kind of religion that could knock sense into their heads. A virgin could make love with as many lovers as she chose, but she was a virgin because as a woman unto herself, no man could own her. No one could use her for anything but the purpose she'd been trained for, bringing heaven to earth through the sacred mediation of her body. Temple dancers were revered rather than reviled, like modern prostitutes often are. Back then, the holy and the erotic weren't diametrically opposed. No one had to put them together because until Christianity came along, no one thought of splitting them apart. The holy lust version of female sex and power became anathema to early church fathers. Demonizing the wild, primal, liberating eros of the unchecked feminine, they bound it in a psychic straitjacket that persists today between many women and their orgasm, many females and their power. That jacket doesn't only bind ecstasy, but traps the life force, because sex isn't only pleasure-giving, but life-giving, life-sustaining, and life-renewing. The moment that powermongers inserted God the Father between a woman and her bliss, the stage was set for historic misery, because men lost the key to the interior sanctuary of women, and women lost the primal wholeness they're still trying to reclaim. The split lives on in modern culture. The name for the female crotch, pudendum, is Latin for mound of shame. Hysterectomies derived from the notion that a woman who gets hysterical has too much uterus and should have it removed. Still today, in some parts of the world, that surgery, as well as clitorectomies, an abomination, are performed for dubious reasons. Because of religious appropriation, I believe through the ages, this sign suffered more misunderstanding than any and must be radically reconstructed. As the sign most wedded to devotion, any true understanding of it requires banishing the catechism from the temple. Like a temple dancer, a Virgo of any gender was born to serve. Once they figure out how not to serve and what not to serve, and find a way to serve that serves themselves, service becomes more akin to dancing than drudgery. Orgasm, too, is a kind of service because it burns out the gunk that collects from being incarnate in a body during a confused and toxic time on planet Earth. Modern civilization might be batshit crazy, but orgasm is one of the least mixed up things on the planet. I'm going to take a pause there, even though there's more in that section to come back to, because I feel that what I probably said is maybe stirring some ideas and responses. And so I'm just wondering if there's anything you want to say in response to that or in addition to that.
There's so much. Do we have a month? Mm. Well, as a woman, as a woman who has a Virgo moon, as a woman who has her Vesta at the top of her chart in the most high location, I deeply relate to all of this, and I think I want to be really personal and recall the very first reading that we did, where within about 5 minutes, and Mark and I had never met, and that was in 2012 or 2013, March 28th, 2013. Mark, you acknowledged that that you couldn't guarantee that it hadn't happened in this lifetime, but you thought it probably hadn't, but that I had frozen sexual trauma that was freezing my life force. And you very artfully, shamanically, even surgically, I would say, took me on a journey to begin to connect to the reality that being born into a female body means, and this is true for me, it is the birthright of all women. And you conjured this inside of me and gave me the possibility of something that I didn't know exists, that it really is my birthright and the birthright of every woman to open deeply to pleasure and to live in a state of openness and to some degree bliss. I want to be careful when I talk about that, because I'm not one of these bliss ninny tantra people who's like trying to chase sexual opening and orgasm like heroin, right? Where it becomes an addictive thing. I don't think that that's such a healthy way to go about it. And this possibility that I could live in all the way to my body and open was profound for me, because at that time I was practically anorgastic. So I think that that's the jumping off point for me. Is I'm sure I'm not the only woman that you have sat with in readings and that will be touched by this writing in your book. And I'm curious, I don't know if there's anything that you want to say about how you've discovered that, explored that. Why is that something that you would dive into in the first 5 minutes of a reading with a client that you've never met? You know,
Following my intuition, because normally I don't. Out of the thousands of readings I've done, I don't know if there's been even a single other reading where in the first 5 minutes I dove right into sacred sex and all of that, because I was just totally following my intuition. A lot of what I'm doing in my soul level astrology readings isn't necessarily astrology. Some of it is psychic, intuitive, instinctual, and something just told me, just say this because it feels so strong. And so, sometimes I can point to astrological features in the birth chart that prompt me to say a particular thing. But I'm a much more instinctual, creative jazz artist astrologer than I am an academic one. So probably it was just my intuition that said, it's a little early on to say this to someone you never met before. And so what if it needs to be said? So that's.
And it did need to be said, and it changed my life entirely. I was thinking about this conversation, and I looked up the word sacred, which means hallowed, consecrated, or made holy by association with divinity or divine things, or by religious ceremony or sanction. And it comes from the Latin sacrare, which means to make sacred, to consecrate, to hold sacred, to immortalize, to set apart, and to dedicate. And what you conjured for me that day in my own psyche and my soul and my body, and what I hear you conjuring in this book when you're reading about Virgo, is there's been a split between the body and the soul, between the body and spirit. And my father was a great follower of Aristotle, right? Where we're always seeking to overcome the physical body with spirit. And you very much, you hold that in a very different way. And I'm actually going to read something that you said to me that day because it was so exquisite. And this is, I transcribed that reading and I've gone back to it many times. You said, whatever part of you has not yet fallen in love with existence via your own body is the undiscovered territory that you can no longer afford to ignore. You're being summoned to a council with spirit and soul and body. And you went on to talk about how my body was the contested territory and that all of the unresolved memories, emotions, and wounds that I had were the place that I needed to dive into inside of myself to free up my trapped life force. And so began that journey. You know, I was right in the middle of a dark night of the soul when we had that reading. And it was as though, and my nervous system was completely blown out. And it was as though I was this cold ashen hearth and you went, and you breathed under this like one little spark I had left. And I started to come back to life. And I hear that in the words of your book, you know, in the way that you are speaking to the relationship, because a Virgo, of course, is an earth sign. So it's going to relate to the physical and to the body. And I don't even know what to ask you right now. I'm just so deeply touched by the transformation that this has brought to me, by the many people that I've touched. I've just in this last 2 weeks in my practice have started to work with 3 women ages 24 to 64 who have never had an orgasm in their life. And so the way that you've touched me, that this book has touched me, that this book will touch other people is quite profound, to bring us back into connection and to consecrate our bodies as the holy sacred temples that they are.
Thank you. Yeah, what you're saying is reminding me of the feeling that I had through much of the writing, which took 4 years and 3 months, 7 days a week. It was a labor of love and a shamanic journey. And one of the tasks I set for myself was that if there was a reader on the verge of suicide of any of the 12 signs, I tried to write those 12 chapters that they would no longer be there anymore by the time they got to the end of the chapter. And that was making love to the soul. I had to fall in love with the darkness and light of each sun sign. And so that way of making love, as a heterosexual male who's been chasing the goddess all my life, I can't help but become a champion for that part of the human soul that's trapped in the body. And sexuality isn't the only way to release that trap, but it's one of the most direct, because it is just so primal and so misunderstood in this culture. Let me go on and read a little more of that chapter. Some Virgos and people with strong Virgo in their chart are drawn towards sex as healing. Apart from its ability to satiate desire, sexuality can loosen up trauma stored in the body. Long-standing wounds inflamed by desire rise toward the contact point of a lover's touch, where they can be released by orgasm. True to her temple dancing forebears, withholding such healing power can feel wrong to Virgo, as if she's breaking an ancient contract, which can be confusing if her body wants to make love to someone her mind doesn't, or vice versa. Sacred sexuality often gets lost in a culture where sex is used to sell toothpaste. One reason modern culture is ignorant of the true nature and broad spectrum of sexuality is because, unlike earlier cultures, sexual wisdom is rarely passed from elder to younger. Rather, it's locked in the infamous black box that adults tell kids not to open. The primary indicators of sexual distortion in mass consciousness are TV and movies, where breathlessness is either equated with one-night stands or forbidden fruit occurring clandestinely, extramaritally, or if one of the lovers is about to die. Such melodrama exacerbates the historic split, as if getting turned on is a sin. And any couple who remains in a monogamous relationship for 40 years has no chance of fucking each other's brains out. In ancient China, widows whose husbands were slain in battle initiated young men into sex, serving two needs at once. On their wedding eves, Chinese daughters received pillow books from their mothers, illustrating positions they could try with their husbands. Sexuality wasn't demonized, but illuminated. And I think that I wanted to read that section because it seems to me that the amount of multidimensional spectrum in sexuality is something that the modern Western culture only ever explores like 10% of.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, when do you see movies with two people who are just laughing and laughing as they have intercourse? I mean, maybe one movie ever. I can't even think of that. I'm just inventing it.
Mm-hmm.
When do you see movies where two people are making love and one of them goes into a spontaneous past life regression because the pain of that life had been haunting her each time her soul came back and took a body in every reincarnation, or because maybe she was raped and maybe the dark masculine had penetrated her in this life or in a past life, and now maybe the bright masculine was penetrating her. This is what's happened to me in a couple of my relationships with deep long-term lovers. Is the sense was there, and in some cases the truth was there, that they had been raped, and the dark version of the masculine had gone in them in such a way that their sexuality never felt safe again to come out. They didn't even feel fully safe in their body, let alone in their sex.
That's right. And that and I think it was my third reading that you talked about how this manicness that I had, and anybody who knows me knows that in my younger years, I was very much like a bull in a china shop. There was Anne's body and there was this cloud of intense chaos flying around outside of my body. And you said, the key to this right now is there's a part of your sexuality that's been frozen. And you're in a time bleed right now. When it was because of a particular transit that was happening in my chart. And just trust and go in there. And I actually had this experience with this lover of having that former self of me who was sold as a virgin, as a slave. And her first experience of sex was being raped by her master. And this entire lifetime, up to that moment, and I think I was 46 years old then, maybe 45, I had tremendous sex desire and I wanted to engage, and I was very curious and not orgastic. And every time I would be penetrated, there was terror underneath the desire. So I could never actually enjoy those experiences. And I was so blessed with this tantric lover, my first experiences of tantra, who I told him what was happening, and he asked permission and asked if I gave consent. And this entirely other opening happened. And for the first time, I could experience my sexuality and eroticism with pleasure and with joy and without terror and fear. And I am pretty certain that I'm not the only woman that has had that experience. And I had rapes from this lifetime and sexual trauma from this lifetime as well. However, it was really the past life stuff that was plaguing me, and I didn't know it. Right. And so this touched a very deep place in me, and touches a very deep place in me that I'm sure gets touched in many, many women. Especially it gets worse as we begin to awaken. And that was something you said in that first reading that really touched me as well, is I said, I don't understand. I want to open now. Why can't I just open? And you said, it's because you're getting to the core of the wound. And there's like the callous, dead skin around the tender new skin. and you're almost there, and you just have to keep going. And that gave me so much faith and hope, because it was during those years I was doing the trauma work, and every time I'd be touched, I would be crying and screaming, and it wasn't very pleasurable for the most part. And it took a lot to get through those layers to open, and I still continue to go through those layers to open more deeply, to
Yeah.
access that.
Yeah, I understand. Thanks for sharing that. It just feels as though when we talk about sexuality, we're talking about the life force.
Yeah.
And sex needs to be sprung from its cultural demonization. And then again, the other extreme is making it so casual that it becomes meaningless. And so somewhere between the demonization and fear of sex and the utter casual, oh, it's nothing to just have sex all the time, I think we have to find some new medium, which I'm going to check with the beautiful Marcella to see if there maybe something wants to come from there.
Well, I just really appreciate the tact you both are taking in this conversation, because there is so much. I'm wanting to find the right phrase. I guess I'll just say sexual education, because I think no matter what it is education. But there's so much sexual education out there that leans towards the high. And so I just really wanted to punctuate what Anne was weaving in at the beginning of the session around, it's not just about the bliss, it's not just about the pleasure. There's a deep healing that comes through our sexual engagement. And Mark, I know your commitment towards that as well. And it isn't always fun, and myself too. I've had many experiences similar to Anne's, and have been held in communities where I feel like there wasn't a lot of consciousness around trauma. That training had not been happening yet. So it just feels really ecstatic to me, actually, when we can kind of weave the truth of the matter around how much sexual trauma many of us are carrying in our bodies, and the actual practical work that it takes to help move that through the body, because you can't necessarily do it from up here. You can talk until you're blue in the face, and it's not necessarily going to recreate the healthy patterning that you need until you're actually willing to take those risks. So it just feels really good to have you all kind of delving into the trauma part as well as the life force liberation part of the conversation.
Yeah. And there's the trauma aspect. And then there's also the deep cultural, religious, spiritual beliefs that have been ingrained that I wouldn't necessarily say are traumatic in the same way in the nervous system. However, they create a tremendous blockage in the life force. I remember asking my mom when I was a teenager, what does horny mean? And her verbatim response to me was, horny is okay if you're in bed with your marriage partner, but not if you're in the backseat of a car with a boy. From which I extrapolated, that must mean something about this good feeling I get inside of my body, right? And so there's all of the trauma, which is recent in the last decade that we understand more about the nervous system, the brain, and the workings of trauma. And also the many belief systems that have been just inculcated and ground in to our minds, our bodies, our souls, that we're all freeing up, and that we're also in the process, as you and Mark and I are all engaged with, of how do we open that space and maintain sacredness, not just casualness, and also openness with no guilt and no shame, so that the body can be fully inhabited, so that we can claim all of who we are, our sexuality being an aspect of that.
Yeah, and that's a good point, because it seems impossible to extract sexual dysfunction from a human organism and treat it as if it was this one part of them that's wrong and everything else is right. I mean, it just feels like sexuality is the source of life. We come from the lovemaking that our parents had. And so that source, the Shakti, the chi, the life force, the kundalini, once it's released, once it's unblocked, can be used for a lot of other things besides sex, like regenerating your health and making you want to be alive again. So it feels as though to be a whole person, how could sexuality not be a part of it? It just, it has to be, it has to be considered. In my work, I don't advertise myself as sacred sex. I'm a soul level astrologer. And sexuality is one of the channels that often needs to be cleared to be able to be happy and healthy and whole and believe in something worth living for. I mean, to be able to make love, that's worth sticking around incarnation,
It's true. I had this experience repeatedly because I was suicidal. I tried to commit suicide when I was 16, and I meant for it to work. It wasn't just a cry for attention. And repeatedly over those next 15 years or so, when it would be so bad and so dark, and I would be like, I don't think I can do this. What I got shown over and over again were animals that were playing in a mating dance, whether it was two squirrels chasing each other around, or birds circling each other, or dogs being playful. And when that would happen, I'd be like, okay, there's hope, right? Somewhere along the line, I'm gonna be able to play and let myself be this amazing, magical, playful, free creature that I am. And so I very much appreciate that. Mark, I'm wondering, you've been sharing with us from Virgo. Is there another sign? Are there some other passages in the Ruby Heart of the Dragon that you feel like illuminate this topic, that bring forth some more pearls of wisdom?
Yeah, I go into the Scorpio chapter. There's some parts to one of which is a poem that I wrote, a brief poem. Whisper to the flame, take me, break me, scrape everything but God off me. Let me come naked unto this house of fire. Burn the knowing out of me and fill me with love that's not love of, but just love, just love, just love.
Almost, it reminds me, it's akin to Rumi, that poem.
Yeah, it was me imitating Rumi. It was having read Rumi for enough years to bring Rumi into me. And he's also a Libra, like I'm a Libra, to bring Rumi into me and then come out with my own version of that. I could have never written that if not for all the Rumi that I read. And that goes in the Scorpio chapter, where I'm going to pick up here because I think Scorpio gets at the soul of sex. And most Scorpios I have found are not infatuated with sex, are not addicted to sex. But there's something deep like that where Scorpio is craving to make love to life. And here's where I'll read a little bit from the tail end of that chapter. Scorpio is whatever you can't live without. It's the cleansing catharsis of sexual union and stark perseverance in the face of ridicule and scorn. It's the deepest chamber of self-confrontation and the craving of estranged lovers to reunite. It's humanity's search for wholeness. How multitudes can thrive on superficial existence while such great and towering love remains unclaimed is something the Scorpio parts of us will never understand. The soul inside the awakening child takes a good look at the world and says, my mother is not who she is. My neighbors are not who they seem. We are not who we're supposed to be. I came for love, but love isn't happening. So I'll put my real life on hold in favor of the next best option, which is to construct some verisimilitude that can carry me through. I'll create a changeling. Living without love and wholeness is the full-time job everyone's employed in, but no one's talking about. As if the world really were the way it looks on TV game shows and steamship cruises. Inside this virtual reality, our inner nature suffers cramps of stagnated love while the canned laughter goes on and on. Obsession, freed from expectation, can turn you into a superhero with the compassion of Kuan Yin and strength of the Incredible Hulk. Scorpio's genius is to gain liberation via obsession. Unlike the zodiac's other revolutionary a few signs down the road, Aquarius, who seeks liberation from non-attachment. If you become sexually free in the most genuine way, your sex life probably won't fit the picture most people imagine. Sexual freedom has little to do with the number of lovers you have or the fancy positions you pull off. It has little to do with how many people think you're hot. Sexual freedom arises when you come alive inside and feel everything you feel. It arises when the Shakti, the primal life force in your body, meets no resistance in the outlets it uses to stream into someone else. And when the strong force of desire in someone else meets no resistance streaming into you. Sexual freedom occurs when your heart opens and keeps you as vibrantly present to your lover's experience as to your own. So that's where I wanted to move it from the Virgo version of sex that I was writing about to the Scorpio version, which is the part of every human being that's craving to crack through the artificial existence and make love to life. Or else why be alive? Why even be alive? And yes, as you and Marcella have brought in tonight, that's not just a glorious ecstasy trip of the greatest, highest sides of bliss and orgasm. It's if you really want to make love, you have to make love to the darkness as much as the light. You know, you have to really bring it down. You can't know me if you want to be with me on any deep level. You can't only know my greatest attributes. You can't only know my grace, my kindness. They're very real. My compassion is very real and deep, but they're by no means the only parts of me. So you're going to have to make love to my darkness. To write this book, I had to make love to the darkness of every sign and my own darkness, as well as the light. And when you bring that much desire body in, when you bring that much radiance in, one of the first things that happens is it shines into your distortion and brokenness and ugliness. And then if you can make love to your distortion and brokenness and ugliness, now you're making love.
Yeah, and that's the power of Scorpio, you know, where you were describing Virgo as wanting to surrender and to find what's worth devoting itself to, and how to be self-devoted as well as devoted to the other. And Scorpio finding freedom rather than through the consecration of devotion, Scorpio finding freedom through its going all the way into the obsessive, desirous nature to come out the other side. And and I think that that's the other mythos that bears bringing in here is that, you know, the problem with Pandora's box was not that they opened the box, but that they tried to close it. And that to take this journey is of opening oneself to one's own sacred sexuality, however that expression gives itself, whether it's the shadow that's being healed or the light that's shining and bringing healing, or the both and of that. There's a profound commitment to going all the way through to the other side of allowing everything to move, where we get to land all the way into our wholeness, you know, that we've cleared enough of the channels that we get to actually land and be in ourselves, and not that that's a journey that ever ends, as far as I can tell. Maybe it does, but
Yeah. Yeah. It feels like the soul reincarnates to make love with existence, and making love with existence shouldn't look like a Hallmark card stoned hippie dream. That's just one part of it. You know, there is a magic, but making love with existence, you know, there's an intense dance between the incarnational dragon of life, the stretch between the unresolved issues of your past and the brightest promise of your future is a dragon. And that ruby heart is your sun sign. And when that ruby heart ignites, it can really encourage your passion to wake up. And you know, I look at someone, I've met few people that I felt are sexually liberated in my life. And my vision of that is way, way different than most people's. And so for me, a person who's truly sexually liberated might be someone who's hasn't made love in 9 years. Why do I say that? Because if you're all right with yourself, if you're in a state of love with the world, when sexuality becomes something you can totally engage in and truly bring all of yourself into it, and also still be that much engaged with incarnation when you're not making love, or when you don't even have a partner for years, I call that liberated. So I don't think someone being sexually liberated means they're always making love, or they have more than one partner, or they're multi-orgasmic. I think those things are great. But I think the deep sexual liberation that wants to happen now is that the human species is enslaved in an artificial state, valuing all the wrong things. Who's valuing love? Who's living for love? Unless you're living for love, you're not making love to your incarnation. You're not making love to the physical plane. You're still bound up. But when your energy deep at the core is freed to write. I mean, writing this book for 4 years was making love. I had to make love to that muse over and over, no matter how I felt that day, even if I was stymied. And, you know, but the book was a labor of love. And somewhere around the second year, I really totally fell in love with the signs, and just, it was like getting my hands on the body of each sign and making love to it. And so I'm going to let Marcella talk to you for a second so I can fill up my water glass.
I just had to come in when he was putting his hands on the body of the signs. I'm like, I got to show up now. Let's see if I can organize this. Okay. So I think we're going to be wrapping up here in a minute. Mark is getting a cup of water, but while I have Anne all to myself, I just thought I really wanted to ask you because we're talking about sacred sex in the modern age, and you work with technique, and I know you get paid to give your advice, and I don't want to ask for anything that you don't feel good giving freely, but I wanted to ask for you, is there one technique you'd be willing to give or share for people that are working with trauma, that have that experience of wanting to open, but really there's just so much fear that gets in the way sometimes? What helped you through that?
yeah, I mean, just to keep it very simple, and I'm happy to offer something. Thank you for asking. I always like it to be very practical and down to earth. I would say, simply put, that when the fear arises, when that part of us that wants to disembody, when you can feel yourself leaving, going numb, checking out, the two things that can happen is one, if you can catch yourself and take a really deep breath and breathe in, and help yourself land and stay present with what is. And I find sound to be unbelievably helpful, to make the sound that goes with whatever I'm feeling. And in the beginning, I felt when I first had started receiving sacred spot massage, it sometimes felt like shards of glass in my cervix. It did not necessarily feel good. And making the sound of the the ow, or even the sound of the numb. There was a lot of numbness also. So breath and sound, without knowing any. I also study shamanic sexuality, and so without going into a lot of tantric technique or Kadoshka or shamanic sexuality technique, we all have access to our breath and to sound at any moment. And to also be vulnerable. If you're with yourself, that's one thing. If you're with your partner, to even say, hey, I feel really afraid right now. I don't know what to do. Will you just look at me and will you just breathe with me? Eye contact. Just for some things to travel through. I'm giving you three things apparently: breath, sound, and here's the third one is vulnerability with, the partner that you're with. And hopefully you've chosen a partner that you can be vulnerable with. If not, chances are you shouldn't be in bed with them. Right? But to acknowledge, because some things are scary and we need to be witnessed and we need to have enough love around us to feel safe enough to go through those places that we can't quite travel to all by ourselves. So I did a lot of asking to be held in those early years. Will you just look at me and hold me for a minute, and then we can be more erotic again. So that's what I would say for
Thank you.
just simple things that we all can practice at any moment.
Yeah. So just to recap: breath, sound, vulnerability / connection.
Yep.
Yeah, I think that's really beautiful. And thank you for being willing to share. And
of course.
Mark.
I'm glad you asked and made it practical,
Yeah. And Mark is back now. So I know we're about to wrap up, and I just wanted to turn it back to you if you wanted to add anything. I had asked Anne really what she found really helped her during that time of her life when she was starting to work through that trauma, since it's something so many people work with.
Yeah, I think it's really good that you went into that, because, especially if you factor past lives in, there's probably few people on the planet who never had sexual trauma.
Right.
There's already, even without factoring past lives, there's few people on the planet who haven't had sexual trauma. But once you add past lives in, it seems like almost everyone was either a perpetrator or a victim or both from life to life to life throughout life. And being alive is a very traumatic state at this time, especially on Earth, because there are so many things wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And there are so many lies and deceptions and delusions.
Mm-hmm.
And the future is more uncertain than probably any other time in human history. That's all traumatic, even if you never were sexually violated, even if you never violated anyone sexually. So I think that any time that we go into deep sex, there needs a lot of trust and holding. And I've learned a lot of holding through my clients, my lovers, and even my students. Though I don't have sex with them, we go into such deep areas that they need to feel completely held, unconditionally. And it just feels as though whoever you are and whatever your experiences have been, present life and past life in sex, that there's a healing there, that there's an invitation, there's a summons in the body that the body usually knows a lot better than the mind.
Mm-hmm. And that reminds me of a teaching that you gave. I think it was the first in-person circle I attended, and I said, okay, because felt like, to have a reading with Mark Borax is a soul force experience. It's a full soul experience. At least it always has been for me. And I felt a lot of trepidation to study with you. And I'm like, oh my goodness, how am I ever going to offer something anywhere close to what he's doing? And I knew at the same time, I'm going to do this. I want to do this. I want to be an offering. I want to offer in this way to help people come home to themselves. And I asked you, what do you sit with when you sit in a reading? Like, what's the mantra that we can be with? And you said, I'm here and I see you. I'm here and I see you. And we played with the emphasis being on different words. And I feel like that's very much the same, whether sitting in a reading or you're writing this book and imagining the people that are reading it, or I'm with one of my Tantra clients, or, whatever, that instead of being in this false reality that is constantly pulling and tugging on all of us, to become as present as we possibly can,
Yes,
to be
that's
here
beautiful.
as me seeing you. So I just am so happy to get to engage in this conversation with you, both of you, and for the many ways that this work has influenced my life. And I am ecstatic that this book is something that, it's one thing to study for 6 semesters with Mark Borax or to get a one-on-one reading. And this book gives, thousands of people the opportunity to become present in this territory of the soul through astrology. And what a wonderful gift. And thank you for laboring. You labored for 4.5 years to give birth to this. And I just thank you so much for what this offering is and will be for the world.
Thank you, Anne. Thank you for joining us tonight. And it's been a pleasure to talk with you about sacred sex in the modern age and to hear your heartfelt stories and struggles and understandings. And thank you, Marcella, for being with us tonight and mediating. Is there any final things you want to say to our audience?
There are not
And
long
before
ones.
she does that, I just want to take a moment to tip my hat, so to speak, to Marcella, who, behind every amazing man is a more amazing woman. And though Mark, in this particular version of reality, is the headliner, I am very certain, and I know from being behind the scenes, that Marcella is a profound celestial priestess in her own right, who brings herself all the way down to earth to tend to many things simultaneously, and also is genius with Mark's genius. And Marcella, thank you so much. And thank you for being an image maker to me of the feminine. I learned so much from your way of being. In the beginning, I could hardly even understand you because you were coming from such a feminine space. And I was so, beaten down by my dark masculine ways of being. And just hearing how you would speak and be with us showed me rays of feminine manifestation that I didn't even know were possible. So I thank you and honor you.
Yeah, well, thank you so much, Ann Vajradakini. I love speaking your full name this way, and it's really vice versa. We've all learned a lot from each other, and that's what I love about the spaces that Mark creates, actually, is that for as powerful of a speaker, and I like the words that you use, but I can't recall them, but a word generator that Mark is, I really love that the circles that we have been traveling in around the work that he does tends to strip things down of their spiritual superiority so that we really can meet heart to heart, gifts being exchanged on the many different levels. Some of us are more advanced and some of us are still learning. And so thanks for being another female in my life that we can play that way with, because that's really what it's about for me, you know?
Yeah, it's the good stuff. And before you complete, Marcella, I just want to make a plug that I and my co-host here in Colorado, Gemma Wilcox of Gemma Wilcox Productions, are working on our dates and getting a landing pad for Mark, who's going to be coming to Colorado the week of August 20th. We're for sure going to be at the Mercury Cafe, and we're looking at our other venues, and I'm going to do some very personal in-home house concert book readings here in my home in Longmont. And so those of you that are in Colorado, just mark that week in pencil in your calendars. And once we have it landed, there will be more information soon, because Mark's going to come from all the way from Putney Mountain in Vermont to Colorado to share this book with us. And I'm so looking forward to that.
Thank you.
So great. Yeah, thank you so much, Anne and Mark. I want to again just acknowledge the way that your relationship to sexuality gets woven throughout this book. So we touched on a couple of the signs today, but I just want to reinforce that no matter what part of the zodiac you line up with, by taking some time and reading this book, you will get a lot of different insights that are not always explicit. Yeah, thank you. The Ruby Heart of the Dragon, Sun Signs for Our Times. We still want to go for number 1. We're not giving up. We're at number 2 on Amazon now. I
have one more piece while you're umming
yes.
that I want to acknowledge, which is that one of the things that Mark brings in his essence, in his teachings and his writings, is the reclamation of the light side of the masculine. Because we spent a lot of time in this culture in the last few years dealing with the shadow side of the masculine, the part of the masculine that has perpetrated the feminine. And the healing, you know, in order for the healing and for the wholeness to happen between men and women, and on a collective, on a personal level and on a collective level, while the feminine absolutely must reclaim her right to pleasure and her Shakti, the masculine also has to do the same and walk in the light. You know, the word lingam in Sanskrit means wand of God or wand of light. And so a man's lingam, his cock, is the most powerful healing tool he has available to him in some ways. So I just also, Mark, want to thank you for the work that you've personally done and what you've brought forth to bring more of the powerful, potent, strong masculine that is in the light into this world. And I know that that is work that you continue to do. So just thank you for that. I just couldn't, we've been so focused on the feminine, I had to bring in the masculine.
Thank you. Thank you for creating that balance. All right, until next time, I hope we do this again so we can get more into maybe technique and how this applies to our lives in the modern age.
And you're putting the link in the chat, right, Marcella, so they can get the book?
I already did.
Excellent.
Okay, farewell, everyone.
Thank you.
Great to have you, Anne.